Welcome back to A Complete History of Manchester United. I'm your host, Wayne Barton, author and producer of Manchester United books and films, joined as always by the legendary football writer Paddy Barclay, author of the definitive biography of Sir Matt Busby. And if you are watching this podcast or listening back to it, you should have a copy of that book to read along whilst doing so. And have one of mine once you've put Matt Busby's biography down as well. If you're watching the video, please give it a like and subscribe. Join in on the conversation in the comment section as well. If you're listening back to the audio podcast, please be sure to subscribe and give us a review on the platform you're listening on. 1966, 67. We glossed over what happened in the events of the summer of 1966, so we don't need to recount those anymore. But there is a big change at the start of this season. United looking to push on and win the title again after fairly disappointing climax to the previous season. After it seemed to start so well with especially with George Best in scintillating form in Lisbon. The big change actually, there are a couple of big changes. One in the wing positions and one in goal. The first one that we should really talk about, Paddy, is Alex Stepney, who actually at the start of the season moved to Chelsea, £50,000, which was a massive fee for a goalkeeper. Tommy Docherty was the manager there, obviously wanted to play him and Peter Bonetti in alternate weeks, which sounds like a Tommy Docherty thing to do. Change your goalkeeper every week. But then Bonetti was a fan favourite at Chelsea, wasn't he? And the problem happened when Chelsea chairman died.
That's right. And the new one, a guy called Charles Pratt, took over, and he, like most people at Chelsea, was a Bonetti fan, and wouldn't let. In fact, Tommy did want to sell Bonetti and replace him with Stepney. I think that was one of Tommy's ruses, this alternating thing, which usually
not like Tommy to have a ruse.
No, absolutely. It's like the joint management thing, one of them goes. And, but yes, Stepney had played for Millwall. He was the goalkeeper of the England under-23s, and already it was known that he was going to be an outstanding goalkeeper, hence the fee. It was 50,000, but Tommy realized that he wasn't going to win this battle with the board, and that he'd have to sell Stepney. Well, Busby was already very much on the case. One day, Stepney, wondering what on earth he'd done in going to Chelsea, was told to come into the ground at Stamford Bridge, whereupon Tommy bundled him into a car and took him to a hotel near Euston Station. And he was all the way there. He was saying, what are we going for? Anyway, his question was answered when they walked through the doors, and there were Jimmy Murphy and Matt Busby. So it was pretty obvious what was going to happen. Busby said, listen, son, would you like to come and play alongside Law, Best, Charlton, Crerand, Styles, et al.? And, his attitude was more or less, where do I sign? And so, it was easily done. However, the fee was, for the third time, Busby had to pay a world record fee for a goalkeeper. He had to pay 55. So Chelsea, Docherty did at least produce a profit for Chelsea. And Stepney went. But there is a funny story next to this, because Stepney was told, go home, pack a bag, confirm it, tell your wife that you're going to have to move, I'm afraid, and go back with Matt and Jimmy in the morning on such and such a 10:30 or whatever it was, back to Manchester. Anyway, unfortunately for Alex's wife, his first wife had been speaking to the Daily Express, and of course it wasn't known that the transfer would go through, but he said, what do you feel about And she said, well, I'm not sure that I want to go and live in Coronation Street. So, and when Matt and Jimmy and Alex sit down in the compartment, Matt's picked up all the papers. He's got them under his arm. He pulls out the Daily Express. I don't want to go to Coronation Street, says Mrs. Stepney. So Matt hands it over and says, what's this about, son? And it was all smoothed out. Once she went up and she realized that Sale, the tree-lined suburb, only 3 miles from Old Trafford, or less, a couple of miles from Old Trafford, was not exactly Coronation Street. She was quite happy and lived there for many, many years, quite happily. So, but it was quite. Stepney could not believe his eyes when he saw the headline. But it instantly made a difference. As we mentioned in previous episodes, United had other goalkeepers who were not deemed up to scratch, including the title winner from '65, Pat Dunn, who had a nightmare. United actually went into the League Cup this year, but they got absolutely battered at Blackpool, and Pat Dunn let in 5. So that gave Matt the perfect excuse to get Stepney in straight away. And my God, what an effect he had. It was a bit like the effect Cantona was to have many, many years later on the attack. Yeah. Stepney had the same effect on the defence. Suddenly they were letting in less than 1 goal a game. Before that, they were letting in 2 a game. So he was an instant success and very much already provided value for the 55,000. May I know I've been blabbing for a long, long time, but may I explain how he got back the money for that? Because United still weren't money bags. They couldn't just pay 55,000. Can I explain to our followers how?
Yeah, of course.
How he raised the money? Well, this was extraordinary because, as you probably are aware from previous episodes, John Connelly from Burnley, who also cost about 55,000, was another great signing, helped them to win a league in '65. Was the final piece in the jigsaw. And John Connelly was not only a very, very good player, he was in the England World Cup squad, and in fact was one of 3 Connelly, Styles and Charlton, of course, the great Charlton by now, who were given a standing ovation at the first game of the season against West Brom. So Connelly's stock was high, and he'd won his place back from Jimmy Ryan, young Jimmy Ryan. And Jimmy Ryan was one of those who said what a wonderful man Alex Stepney was, because whenever Jimmy Ryan got a game in John Connelly's shirt and played well, Connelly would put his arm around him and say, great, son, keep up the good work. You're great doing this, and maybe just, do this a bit more. And he was incredibly unselfish to the young man. So everybody liked John Connelly. And one day, early in the season, Matt came in on a Friday. He was no longer a tracksuit manager by now, but he would always be there on a Friday, the day before the big Saturday match, and usually to drop a player. What one of the players called the wiggly finger. Come over. How do you think you're playing, son? I think you could do. I probably need a rest. Anyway, he didn't bother with this with John Connelly. He says, you're not playing tomorrow. And Connelly says, you're joking. And Matt said, I don't joke about these things. And Connelly, well, people who listen to this podcast and watch it don't like bad language, so I'll not repeat exactly. But he said to the great Matt Busby that you could put your Manchester United where the sun don't shine. And he just went into the shower, got dressed, went home, told his wife that he's finished with Man United. And a couple of weeks later, in fact, days later, he was sold in typical Busby move. He wasn't sold to a competitor. He was sold to 2nd Division Blackburn Rovers. So he wouldn't play against United for £40,000. And that was the bulk of the Stepney money raised. There was another sale later in the season, which produced which balanced the books, and I can't remember quite who it was, but there was another.
Willie Anderson.
Oh, it was Willie Anderson. That's right, because John Aston was already emerging as a really good winger, and could play on one wing while Best played on the other. Jimmy Ryan hadn't convinced Busby at all to the same extent, but that was Willie Anderson, who'd given good service, and in fact, this was reflected in a fee of £20,000, which Aston Villa paid for him. So there were the books balanced, as they always seem to have to be at Manchester United. Anyway, that's enough for me blethering on, Wayne. I'm sure all our listeners want to listen to you. So pick up the story.
Yeah, Stepney, you mentioned his transformational impact at the back. He certainly did. We've talked about Harry Gregg in previous episodes, and like you quite rightly mentioned, he's the third world record fee. So if you've been following along on the podcast, you're like, well, we all know Harry Gregg is. Remember that Reg Allen was the first.
Reg Allen from QPR. Yes.
And of course, Alex Ferguson would break that record, the world record for a goalkeeper, many moons later, for Fabian Barthez, I believe it was, at 7.8 million at the time. I think that quickly got obliterated when I think it was Buffon who went to Juventus, I think, for around 30 million, and that stood for a while before the fees went out of control. But yeah, United,
goalkeepers then, after Buffon really was the first goalkeeper superstar, wasn't he? And that,
yeah,
and they then became, their value was properly recognised. I mean, when you think that Peter Schmeichel came for £600,000. That would just sort of serves to underline what a bargain that was.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, Busby obviously identified goalkeepers in a certain way, and clearly with their importance in mind. And he'd obviously made this change with Harry Gregg, and they'd obviously identified his style of play. And it was similar with Stepney in that, obviously the biggest problem that Busby had with these other goalkeepers, even Gregg included, was their unreliability. And Stepney was a byword for consistency.
Even though he was young, that's true. That's a point, because at that time, goalkeepers were not known for, everyone thought they don't really mature till they're about late 20s, early 30s. Gregg by now was 34, and as you've chronicled in previous episodes, shoulder and back injuries were always a problem. Harry was given a free transfer and went to Stoke, but he didn't really play much there before retiring. So, his fee obviously didn't raise any money. But yes, a time of gentle improvement rather than massive changes needed. And United's form reflected this, didn't it?
Yeah, Stepney, one final note on Stepney before we move on. Going back to Gregg, and we made that comparison before about Gregg being a little bit like Peter Schmeichel. It kind of follows that Stepney's a little bit like Van der Sar. He was unruffled.
Yes.
Joined in the play as well, and he was included in attacking routines, which wasn't really common for goalkeepers then. There's a famous story that's going to come in the next episode about how Stepney got involved in attacking routines, but his composure had this instant settling effect as well. At the time when where you mentioned in previous episodes, the entire formation structures were changing in teams now. So it's a stronger four-man defence. And you're quite right. I mean, it was 4-1 where United had lost at Nottingham Forest, and that five goals at Blackpool, which had really... another four. The four actually against Forest. Let's talk about this one, because we're talking about players moving out of the team. It appeared at this one, Forest come to, it was at the City Ground, 4-1.
Yeah.
Johnny Carey in charge of Forest. And it appeared that would be the end of Shea Brennan, because he was the casualty of that. He was instantly dropped, and Bobby Noble then came into the side, and it was his position from that point.
Shea Brennan must have been up against Ian Storey-Moore, I would guess. He was virtually unplayable. So Shea Brennan got shredded by Storey-Moore and was then dropped. Presumably, Dunn moved to right back.
Yeah.
Into Brennan's shirt, and Noble came in at left back, and of course was instantly magnificent.
Yeah, so Noble and Stepney in the defence added this assurance, this quality, and United's consistency picked up immediately. And they went on a great run just before Christmas. and then they lost a couple just before. But it's after the turn of the year, really, when United really click in. They're unbeaten at home all season. A quick mention on the Old Trafford form as well, just because this season there's a post-war attendance record. We've been tracking them throughout the episodes, but with the new stand where it is, and the attendance, the capacity raised, United attracted, I think, before Christmas that 1 million people had watched United in league football, and by April, the 1 million mark was at Old Trafford alone, which shows you how intrigued the public were to watch this United team.
Yeah.
Geoffrey Green, the great writer, described Old Trafford as a palace amongst English club grounds.
Yeah.
There was a new indoor training facility at the Cliff as well. So United were putting all this money in. We already talked about what they were doing at Old Trafford in previous episodes. But they seem to be that it's coincidental, surely, because every team doesn't want to lose at home. But there would seem to be an extra sense of pride around Old Trafford. They didn't want to lose games there, and that was reflected in the fact. Also, there was a thing in fact, I'm quite right. I think it was earlier this season, because United had been dropping a lot of games away from home. Busby changed the philosophy a little bit. The keep it tight kind of thing that we'd heard at Benfica. For the first 15 minutes of games, he was telling Aston and Best to just sit back a little bit, sit compact, protect the defense, and then go out and attack if you like.
Yes. So it was a settled team. It was a settled team at last, and a solid team. There was solidity, and yes, Stepney was definitely one of those. Definitely a major factor in that. Sorry, I'm just turning my phone off because it's doing that an irritating blink. But what I was just going to say, when you talked about those crowd figures, and you talked also about Geoffrey Green's allusion to the increasing splendor of the stadium, definitely the cantilever stand was a key in that. Everybody talks about 58, 68, and even 48 as sort of defining years in Manchester United's history. 66-7, in my opinion, should be looked back at as the year when Manchester United became different. Now, at the moment, we're used to the idea over the last 25, 30 years of Manchester United being one of those clubs with a magical quality, actually more than 30 years, for half a century. But it wasn't a God-given right. And here are the factors. The cantilever stand, which made, sort of fulfilled a little bit of Busby's vision, inspired by his visits to the Bernabeu with the Busby Babes. And there's this fantastic stadium, white against the blue of the sky, and all of this. And he thought he'd build a little of this in his paradise of Manchester, despite the smog. And the cantilever stand in the World Cup, this is World Cup, the emergence of Bobby Charlton as probably possibly the most famous player in the world during the World Cup. And he was playing for Manchester United. He was, I think, about to get the Ballon d'Or, but Law and Best were also to get the Ballon d'Or around this time. So Manchester United had the glamour of three of the greatest players in the world, and the most exciting as well. The stadium befitted such a galaxy of stars. It was the middle of the 60s. What were they called? The swinging 60s. The 60s didn't swing for everybody, but Manchester United had caught that mood, much as Oasis caught Cool Britannia many years later. So Manchester United became different. Don't forget that when Busby took over, and long after Busby had taken over and made Manchester United one of the clubs in England, they could regularly get beaten at the gate by Newcastle, by Tottenham, by Arsenal once or twice, by Liverpool on occasion. But this was the season. The average crowd was, give or take, 54,000, which was not far off capacity. So the gates suddenly in this year, the gates no longer swung. Do you remember when the last episode we talked about only 23,000 at one game towards the end of the season when the title campaign had sort of waned a little? And that was no longer happening. This fortress, Old Trafford, this fortress almost doesn't fully tell the story, because it was something that not only, I mean, Anfield was a fortress for Liverpool around that time as well, but Old Trafford was the kind of, and I wonder if it was when football tourism first started, because I wasn't a Manchester United fan, but I lived in Manchester, and I would go to Old Trafford and see these three great players. Sorry, Paddy Crerand, 3.5 great players. And it was exciting. It was show business. It was part of the swinging 60s. And results came along with it. So although people might say that Manchester United became Manchester United as we know it today in 1968 in our next episode, I think this post World Cup season was the one where Manchester United became Manchester United. They defined themselves as different.
It's so interesting because you mentioned the cocktail of basically the perfect storm. All those ingredients come in, and for someone like my generation, I grew up, and everything you mentioned there, I could reference as the Cantona effect as well. You had Sky, Italia 90, the Premier League coming in, and Cantona coming into United just at the point where they were coming in. So you've got the best element, the fact that soccer's seen by a lot more people, and it's crazy that football, with all its unpredictability, so cyclical sometimes. And United followed similar cycles in good and bad ways. The second half of this season, they really kick in. They're playing great football. They've tightened that away form up, so they're getting a lot of draws on the road. But this is a game where, again, it's 2 points for a win. So when they're picking up these points, they're seen as good results, and they're winning at home all the time as well. You mentioned before we came on air, you were mentioning a goal against Nottingham Forest in February, which was pretty special. They got their own back on Nottingham Forest in spectacular fashion, didn't they?
Yes, it was, as you say, Forest under Johnny Carey, Busby's first great captain, the captain of the 48 cup-winning team, and a man for whom Busby had huge respect, a man who was a little bit like Busby himself. In terms of dignity. Anyway, he was not just dignified, but extremely good at building a football team, and he finally proved this at Nottingham Forest with this very good side, who were definitely a serious challenger for the title, along with United when they came to Old Trafford. It was billed as the title decider. I remember going to it as a young man. What was it? 1966, 7. So it's about 20, just 19, going on 20. I remember going to this match, and Old Trafford was certainly packed for this one. You couldn't get even a standing place, and it was a very good Forest team. We've mentioned Ian Storey-Moore, who all Manchester United fans with any sense of history will know was a very good player, unfortunately, who was unable to fulfill fully his massive potential at Old Trafford due to injury in a later era. But there were other very good players. There's a wonderful, we talk about the dignity of Johnny Carey, a very dignified centre-half, Scottish centre-half called Bobby McKinlay. There were Henry Newton and Terry Hennessy alongside him. John Barnwell, a creative force. So it was a good side, and it came to Old Trafford, and it was 0-0. It was a tight game, both teams playing to their potential until the 85th minute, and Dennis Law. It was obviously going to take something special to settle this match. And Dennis Law was something special. Overhead kick from a corner, past the Forest goalkeeper, Peter Grummett. And United had sneaked 1-0, the title decider. And from then on, they became favourites to do it this time.
Yeah, what we were referencing and doing these comparisons to teams of different eras in United history, one thing strikes me about this team, because they've developed a metronomic consistency. They've got Crerand, Stepney, Folks, and then they were not relying, but they could rely on it. The individual brilliance of a Best or a Low, like you mentioned, or Charlton.
Yeah.
There's a very strong reference that you could make a comparison to the 2019, which had this great consistency around an experience, but then had Rooney, Ronaldo, and Tevez who could do something magical, and that's exactly what United had.
It's a very good comparison, that actually, because and the Forest game was a very good example of it, because when you need what in a lot of European countries, the player who makes the difference. Well, United had three of those, and Law won. Pulled out something special to win that one. However, when I said, and then I sort of implied they then went on to win the league, but it wasn't exactly quite like that, because a week later, Norwich came to Old Trafford in the Cup. I think it was only a week later, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong. And Norwich were a good team, a second division team, but doing well, and particularly good in the Cup, as Old Trafford found out to its cost. Final score: Manchester United 1, Norwich City 2, and it was a huge shock, because United had just apparently proved themselves the best team in the country, and here was a second division team beating them. So that it added to Norwich's reputation as cup as cup shockers, basically. It wasn't the only time they did well. But looking back on it, I don't think it did United's league campaign any harm not to have the beautiful distraction of the FA Cup.
No, absolutely. So the potential injuries that you pick up on a cup run like that weren't really impacted, but United did pick up a couple of significant injuries.
Very significant.
A month after the Norwich defeat, to the day, they welcomed Leicester to Old Trafford. David Hurd scores after 2 minutes. It's a magnificent moment, but disaster strikes at the same time, because in scoring the goal, he breaks his leg, and really from that moment on, his career is definitely United. It's an underrated career, as we've talked about.
It was. I mean, we talked about it in the previous episode, in the 65-6 episode. I think we tried to we dwelt on David Hurd's career and tried to do him a semblance of justice. But yes, as you say, he was still around, still with almost an inevitability scoring goals, when the broken leg really proved the end. I think he would already be in his early 30s by then, would he? About 31.
Yeah, 32. I think he was
32. So, luckily, he'd had the best. And he those superb scoring figures at Arsenal and at Old Trafford would be in history forever. But his injury did, I think, give opportunities to a man we've spoken about before, the endlessly versatile David Sadler, who quietly could still play centre forward. And I think after David Hurd's injury, although he'd been playing quite a few games in defence, John Sadler, the late John Sadler, was a columnist on The Sun, wrote beautifully about football. David Sadler also filled in usefully at centre forward.
Yeah, he did. And to be fair, I think that the whispers of that had been happening earlier in the season. Sadler had been playing at centre forward, and Hurd had been moving to the inside left, as columnists are still describing it as. We'll talk about the formation changes in a bit, but yeah, he was still being described as an inside left, and with Aston playing on the outside left.
Yeah.
There, but yeah, the move was happening anyway. But Hurd, yeah, as you mentioned, he was still scoring plenty of goals. He was still a threat, still massively underrated. And unfortunately, this would do for his Old Trafford career. He would still play football. He recovered to do quite well at Stoke, but obviously it was a devastating injury at precisely the wrong time. Well,
what was it? The other injury was just, as I recall, was just as significant. That was in April. Yeah, it came along in April. That would be Bobby Noble.
Yeah. He was injured in a car crash after United played at Sunderland. They drew 0-0 at that point, on the verge of winning the title. Bobby Noble, fully deserving of his medal since he come into the side. But yeah, he suffered this car crash, and we have talked up Bobby Noble, haven't we? We this was a guy who was going to be an England international, possibly a United captain in the making, and all gone. Even more than David Hurds. He's not going to play again. I think there was an attempt at a comeback in the reserve team, right? He tried to come back and play in the juniors to get his match fitness up, but he wasn't the same. And a tragic end to a fantastic career. And United would suffer another player in maybe 5 or 6 years who would also suffer with a car crash. And when we talk about how well that player did to come back and recover and play hundreds of times for United, it goes to show just how you can't take it for granted, considering what happened to Bobby Noble. Absolutely tragic, his career. Over at the end of the season, but he would get that medal, and it was kind of inevitable the way that United clicked into gear. Right around the end of March, George Best just decided, you know what, I'm going to probably win this title by myself, even though it was there, United were going to win the title, but Best thought I'll put a little bit of razzle dazzle on it, and some of his performances were incredible in the scoring against Fulham, against West Ham, against Aston Villa in this pivotal game, which basically tipped the scales in United favour. To basically say that when they went to West Ham in the penultimate game, the final away game, they could effectively afford to draw, as they had done all the previous away games after Christmas. They developed this sort of keep it tight, get the point, and go home. But they decided at Upton Park, Paddy, that they were going to do something a little bit different.
Yes, this was one of the defining performances, not only of the season, but of the era. Not wholly in a good way, but I'll come on to that later. But on the field, it was magnificent, swashbuckling, swaggering, and that's just the S's. They went to Upton Park. They won 6-1. Each of the three great Lalor, Best and Charlton scored at least one goal. Wayne, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but funnily enough, this morning before we did the recording, I was speaking to a friend of mine who remembers that game and remembers the sheer swagger and style of Manchester United, and how this performance epitomized it. The ground was overflowing, but not wholly with people who were behaving at their best. There was hooliganism, I'm afraid, at this. We've referred to it. The swinging 60s, along with glamour and England winning the World Cup and all that, also saw the rise of hooliganism, and there was plenty of it at West Ham. So, for Busby and for everybody concerned with Man United's reputation, I'm not saying that it was only Man United players at fault, supporters at fault, but Busby, who was very conscious of the club's image, would not have been pleased that Manchester United were not only at the forefront of the style and the achievement of English football, but also, I'm afraid, doing their part for the sort of traducing of the game's reputation off the field. But apart from that, everything was great. Busby by now was on a 10-year contract, and he was on a terrific salary of £10,000 a year plus bonuses, which given the way the team kept winning, were more at least doubling that 10,000. But he deserved it. You look at Old Trafford, 54,000, every week. The beauty of the ground, the fact that their books had been balanced, while this incredibly sexy team had been built. You have to say, that he was worth every penny of his salary. He also, I don't want to make this all about Matt Busby, but he also had a good moment that was nothing to do with Manchester United towards the end of the season, because those who followed this series right from the start will know that Busby's boyhood was spent supporting Celtic. Celtic, meanwhile, had a great season, not only winning the Scottish League, but marching through Europe in a most wonderful style under Jock Stein, a style that Matt, given his his love of attacking, entertaining football, would have approved of. And Celtic found themselves the first British team to reach a European Cup final, achieving this ambition that had thus far eluded Matt Busby, possibly because of the Munich disaster, which was sad to say, and the factor we didn't mention when we talked about all the things that went into the making of Manchester United as something different from even the best football clubs. And anyway, the Celtic went to Lisbon for the European Cup final to play Inter, and went behind and beat them 2-1. By now the season was over. Manchester United were actually on a plane going on tour to America when this happened, which meant that another Celtic supporter, an even more rabid Celtic supporter, Paddy Creran, was unable to follow the match. But Celtic became the first British team to win the European Cup. But who would be the first English team to win it? Well, we'll have to wait and see.
We will indeed. You mentioned the West Ham game. The first half performance in particular for United was absolutely magnificent. They scored 4 in the first 25 minutes. I'm going to read a little bit of a passage from Joe Hume, who was the reporter for the People.
Uh-huh.
He said, Matt Busby and his magnificent 11 swept back into Europe on a wave of emotion and the most devastating spells of soccer magic I have seen in 44 years in the game. If I carry on for another 44 years, I can't hope to see anything better than the first 25 minutes, which produced 4 United goals. George Best was a genius. The goal was reported, Best's goal was reported to be one where Styles had played in the ball and he juggled the ball between his feet and then lashed it in, which sounds like a George Best thing to do.
Yeah.
But you're quite right. I mean, at the time, there's this sort of contrasting picture of this is a complete United as a club in Busby's entire vision from what he envisaged back over 20 years earlier. This is a club built by Matt Busby, even without the European glamour. Everything that was about United had a touch of Busby on it, in a completely positive way. And the only drawback was at the time the club was still getting a little bit of negative press. Again, perhaps tying into this growing feeling of conflict in the game. And United's on pitch, the sort of Scottish streak which ran through them. Also ran red, Lowe, Creran, Fitzpatrick, a lot of combustible players in there. And there was some reports, that they weren't a very likeable United team, basically, even though they had all this magic and the flair. They got Bobby Charlton, the gentleman of football, and George Best with all the skill that he's got. But there was still this sort of feeling that, United were contributing to the off-pitch problems by causing a lot of flare-ups on the pitch as well. You know what I mean? Getting a little bit rowdy.
Yeah. There was a certain love-hate relationship that the general public had with Manchester United, and of course, which persists. In fact, perhaps was exacerbated by the Ferguson era. But that's for another episode. Many weeks in the future, I think.
61,000 turn up to the final home game to see the celebrations. I'll put a few pictures on the screen. The first is of the West Ham celebrations, all the players in their white kits. If you're watching on the video, you'll see that a couple of players have got different shirts because United decided to have a V-neck shirt, but some players still had the round necks. I think George changed his at half time. He wore a different one. And Dennis did as well. So yeah, you can see the players there celebrating with a glass. I wonder if George is still on the lemonade, even though he doesn't seem to have a glass at all in this picture.
No, he doesn't. David said, for those who are listening on audio only, I'll just describe the scene. Of course, they're all grinning. They've just won the title, and most of them have got glasses of champagne in their hands. George has his arm around his friend and flatmate David Sadler, who David's got a glass, but George hasn't. Maybe he's finished his already, but as you say, he preferred lemonade in those days. On the far right of the picture is Bobby Charlton already with a comb over, I notice. And next to him is Nobby Stiles, whose forehead also appears large and lacking in hair at this stage, although his comb over is much more convincing than Bobby's. Paddy Crerand grinning widely, the understated Tony Dunn with a grin too. Bill Foulkes. Who's next to Bill, Wayne? Who's that chap? Oh, that's Shea Brennan, of course. Yeah. John Aston and of course the irrepressible Dennis Law with the widest grin of all. Yeah. So it's a lovely picture.
Obviously, we need to show some of Sir Matt. So we'll some images from the Stoke game. First of all.
Yes. And this is one of, it's in colour actually, this one of the Stoke game, which was a dull 0-0, but the trophy was presented, and there the players are happy for Matt to be brandishing it, and they are walking at his side in Manchester United red, with red socks. And oh, wait a minute, I'm stealing your line, Matt, Wayne, because you always describe the strip at the end of each episode. Sorry about that, but interesting to see that not a logo in sight. Lovely plain strip, that not a logo on it at all. Matt in a suit, collar and tie, looking immaculate as ever. But Old Trafford already, you see, behind you can see the cantilever stand, not a stanchion in sight. This is now we're sort of shocked if we go to old grounds which have obstructed views like Fulham, where I go quite a lot. But in those days, to see a stand with uninterrupted views and no pillars was state of the art.
Yeah. As was the goalkeeper that United have. Let's go through the squad statistics very quickly. Alex Stepney, the goalkeeper this season into the side, making the first 37 of his 539 appearances for the club. 35 of those were in the league. And your eyes are not deceiving you. He did score 2 goals, but we'll come on to that in later episodes. Harry Gregg made 2 appearances, both of those in league. David Gaskell made 5 appearances in the league. And Pat Dunn's single appearance was in the League Cup against Blackpool, as Paddy mentioned earlier. So that's the goalkeeper situation. I'll put up a squad picture for the duration of the squad statistics. Another image of Sir Matt celebrating and looking very, very joyous indeed. The fullbacks this season, Noel Campbell made 4 appearances in the league. Those were his 4 in all competitions. Shea Brennan, as we mentioned, games were a little bit hard to come by until Bobby Noble's misfortune. He made 17 appearances in all competitions. 16 of those were in the league. Tony Dunn, of course, played just about every minute that he could. 43 appearances in all competitions. 40 of those were in the league. Bobby Noble, 31 appearances in all competitions, 29 in the league before tragic stroke for him. Paddy Crerand in the half-back line, defensive midfield, against the tactics in a moment. 42 appearances in all competitions, 3 goals, 39 in the league, and all three goals in the league. Bill Foulkes, the half-back, the centre-back, of course, 4 goals in 35 appearances, 4 in 33 in the league. John Fitzpatrick, 3 single league appearances. Nobby Stiles, 3 goals in 40 in all competitions, 3 in 37 in the league. Again, he's a halfback, but we'll talk about his actual position in a moment. Willie Anderson, 1 substitute appearance before he was sold. John Kennelly, 7 appearances in all competitions, 2 goals, 6 appearances in the league before he was sold. Jimmy Ryan, 5 appearances and a substitute appearance in the league, so the 4-1 in the league before. He found it difficult to get into side, but he was the sort of backup winger for George Best, who didn't need backup because this season he's ultra reliable, playing in every single game, 45 in all competitions. United's top appearance maker, George Best, you wouldn't credit it compared to what's about to follow in following episodes. 10 goals, 10 in 42 in the league. Bobby Charlton, 12 goals in 42 in the league, 44 appearances in all competitions. John Aston on the left wing, 5 goals in 31 games. 30 of those games were in the league, and all 5 goals were in the league as well. David Hurd, before his injury, scored 18 goals in 31 competitions, scored in every competition for United this season, as you would expect of someone with that relentless consistency. 16 in 28 in the league before obviously, his career was lost at United due to that injury. David Sadler made 39 appearances in all competitions, 36 in the league, and scored 5 league goals. This leaves us with the 2 strikers. The 1 strikers have already gone over David Hurd's record. We've got Dennis Law, top goal scorer this season, 25 goals in 38 games, 23 in 36 in the league. You mentioned the colours. They are red, white, and red. Oh, sepia, white, and sepia. If you're looking on the all white away strip. Sometimes wore red socks as well, and the away kit was a blue shirt with white shorts and socks. Average attendance this season, Old Trafford up by 13,000 to 54,726. Already mentioned Dennis Law was the top goal scorer. We'll just run through the tactics very quickly. I've moved it this time to a 4-2-4, which I think we were graduating to anyway, Paddy. And this is probably more accurate what you would have expected to see of this United team this season. Styles in the back line, accompanying Folks, and Noble at left back, Dunn at right back until Brennan came back into the side later on. Crerand would be the midfield too, but you would have Sadler dropping back, you would have Dennis Law dropping back. Jeffrey Green at one point referred to this as a 4-3-3, and he plays in the 3 in midfield, which is interesting. But obviously, we've both talked about Dennis Law in the past that he saw himself as a box-to-box midfielder anyway. So he's a striker for narrative purposes here. And John Aston, a predominantly outside left-sided player. George Best played everywhere. David Sadler would drop back into the defence as well. Very, very. You would almost. You wouldn't call them the Harlem Globetrotters the way that they played, but the way it's so multifunctional, it seems so ahead of its time. David Sadler could move back into defence. Styles could move forward into midfield. Charlton could move into. You would kill to see a team as multifunctional as this today, wouldn't you? Really? Look at how many players and how they could play this position. This formation or this collection of players could play in a multitude of different ways.
Yes. No, that you're quite right. And even you could, if you talk about the pointers towards the future of tactics, I mean, you've already alluded to it, but Stepney saw himself, as not just someone who would save, but who would already have his mind on the next thing. Do I hurl it out to Tony Dunn, or Bobby Noble? That he was always alert to the attacking possibilities. So yes, you're quite right. The thing, of course, had evolved into the back 4 was now the default defensive formation. It had been established for a couple of years. England, of course, played with a back 4 with more. You talk about what would you want? What would you want for a playmaking defender like Bobby Moore now. I don't know, 300 million. I mean, Moore and Jack Charlton were very much a pair. So the days of three at the back were at least temporarily over. So yeah, that's Man United's formation now.
Yeah, and look at the key results. 6-1 at West Ham. That's the key result. United were unbeaten in 67 in the league, so they made a really strong end to the season. But the West Ham one is one of those because of all the Trinity were on the score sheet because of the fashion in which they won.
And when they came back from that, they, as you've already mentioned, the home match, the sort of meaningless from Man United point of view 0-0 draw with Stoke, where the trophy was presented. We've shown the pictures of that. In his press conference, Matt Busby announced that although obviously it was important to try and retain the title next season, he added very firmly that he wanted to have a real go at the European Cup in the following season, which was to be 1967-68. But before then, Manchester United went on the tour that I've just mentioned, having as they flew across the Atlantic, while Celtic with Billy McNeil and Jimmy Johnston from Matt Busby's home village, home area anyway. They arrived in America for a long, long tour, and during it, this Manchester United, who had announced how desperate they were to make a real go at winning the European Cup, they came up against the Portuguese team called Benfica in a friendly in Los Angeles and were beaten by them 3-1. So that was going to be a tough nut to crack if Manchester United were to have a real go at the European Cup. But anyway, we'll see what happens. Who knows?
Elsewhere in football, Spurs won the FA Cup, QPR won the League Cup, and as you already mentioned, Celtic there won the European Cup, became the first British team to win it. One final note of housekeeping: we all talked about the kits. As always, we do the United review, and we have finally made progress on the handshake. We have now have. If you're looking on the video, you can see it. If you're listening on the audio, now it's a right-handed handshake, very clearly.
You see, that didn't hurt, did it? It's right hand on right hand, which is great. It's been right on left, wasn't it? But now they've changed it to right hand on right hand, and well, it still looks great, and still only sixpence. And do you know how much sixpence? Do you know how much sixpence is?
I don't. Have you got the currency?
2.5 pence. 2.5 pence for the official program, with a proper handshake on the front. So you can't beat that for value, can you? Even if the program that we're showing is Saturday, April 1st, April Fool. But what was the score of that game? The home game against West Ham?
3-0. Best, Low, and Charlton on the score sheet.
There you are. Marvelous. Perfect. What a way to finish our review of the 66-7 season.
In typical fashion. If you're watching the video, please give us a like and subscribe. Join in the conversation in the comment section. If you're listening back on the audio podcast, please be sure to subscribe and give us a review of the platform you're listening on. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We will be back next time.